All right, hello, and welcome to part 4 in my thoughts on Bruce Lee. Now, where I last left off, I was talking about the death of Bruce Lee, some of the ideas on how he died, different conspiracies that exist, and what I want to talk about now is like the legacy of Bruce Lee, because one major thing that Bruce Lee did is he really changed how not only Hollywood, but how the general public, particularly in America and Europe, perceives Asian people. Because before Bruce Lee, Asians, would be in movies, but usually if they weren't in an American movie, they would either be very like subservient kind of laborers, or they'd be like Fu Manchu masterminds. And, that tended to be what you got. Or they would be kind of clownish sometimes. But Bruce Lee definitely changed that. I mean, like he said on the Pierre Berton show back in 1971, is he said that I feel that there's something about the Oriental that has never been shown on film. And Pierre Berton was like, well, Hollywood certainly hasn't shown it. And, Bruce Lee knew that. And, he definitely brought a whole other side to Asians. He showed a whole other side. And one of the reasons for his popularity is that he wasn't just a guy who was very physical or an action star. There was an intellectual, philosophical side to Bruce Lee as well. And that's what I always liked about Bruce Lee. He was not one-dimensional. He had a whole other dimension to his character. He was a voracious reader. He owned about 2,000 books. And these were books on everything from, fighting arts to philosophy. He had books on marketing and salesmanship. And Bruce Lee studied how to market Bruce Lee. And one thing you cannot deny about Bruce Lee is the guy did know how to market himself. He really did. And, he studied it. He had a lot of books on it. He studied everything from, verbal communication to nonverbal communication, and really became quite proficient at this. Another thing that I should mention, I already mentioned that he was a voracious trainer, but he was an advocate of weight training as well. In fact, he felt that one of the most neglected things in the martial arts was the fact that there were a lot of martial artists that wouldn't work out, that wouldn't weight train. In fact, I remember reading an article in Black Belt magazine a while back with Hoist Gracie, and Hoist Gracie said that his dad, Elio Gracie, never touched a weight, that he only did Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, that was it. And that was common among martial artists of that era. Bruce Lee was one who advocated weight training. In fact, part of Jeet Kune Do, a huge part of it, is not the art of Jeet Kune Do, but also the training. He believed that you had to be dedicated to total fitness. Not just the martial art, but, physical brute strength, muscular endurance, cardio conditioning, and flexibility. Those four things were what he greatly advocated. And, so, he was, a strong advocate of that. Another thing that, people talk about when they talk about Bruce Lee, especially nowadays, is you'll hear a lot of MMA fighters and, Dana White from the UFC refer to Bruce Lee as the founder of mixed martial arts. Now, if you really look into it and you really study this, you'd see that there are a lot of people thinking that way. There are a lot of people blending things. There are a lot of, people coming up with different training techniques. I mean, I mentioned in an earlier video I did on Count Dante that Count Dante was an early advocate of combining martial arts. So, Bruce Lee wasn't the only one. And a lot of Bruce Lee's idea of combining martial arts was due to the fact that he never got the whole Wing Chun system, so he added other things to it. He added, like I said earlier, fencing and boxing and, what he picked up from Danny Insano on, the Filipino martial arts, Kali or Eskrima. And, he added some of that to Jeet Kune Do as well. There's a lot to the Filipino martial arts. For example, what most people, are probably aware of that, or most people are probably not aware of, actually, the fact that the Filipinos greatly influenced boxing. They really did, because the boxing stance used to be like way out here like this. But then the servicemen went to the Philippines, and they noticed that a lot of Philippine boxers and martial artists had this stance, closer in with their fists. And that became the standard boxing stance. And the Filipinos influenced that. So they had a big impact on boxing. And Bruce Lee added a lot of, the Filipino martial arts, to his style. But, so, he took different things. But the whole thing with Jeet Kune Do, like I said before, was that it was not a fixed system. The idea was that, it was always a work in progress. It was not a fixed system. Bruce Lee didn't like the idea that things would become fixed and then it would become the gospel truth. And even if there was a technique or something in there that was inefficient and didn't work, it was still left in there because it was still thought of as the gospel truth. Bruce Lee didn't believe in that sort of thing. He believed that things should be changed and adapted as people went along and researched new things. Then new things should be added. If something proved to kind of be not as good, then that should be rejected. If something was great, that should be added. So his system was never a set in stone, closed off system. It was always open to new ideas and new research. And that's what Bruce Lee advocated, because he knew there was something with human beings where tended to be creatures of habit, and someone would come up with one idea, and then, that idea would become tradition, and then everyone would have to do it. And new ideas sometimes would get ignored, even if they were great. So, Bruce Lee knew all this. And, that was how he formulated his whole system of Jeet Kune Do. Now, another thing I want to say about Bruce Lee, kind of his influence in popular culture. I mean, you could see it a lot of places. For example, the Street Fighter video games. G.I. Joe, there's a character, Quick Kick, that was obviously influenced by Bruce Lee. And there's a lot of other places where you could see, Bruce Lee's influence. And, it was really quite huge. But another thing I should add is that when Bruce Lee died, they did actually find some ideas for future movies that he wanted to do. If I understand correctly, he wanted to do another movie that was going to be set in San Francisco that would star him and Bolo Yeung. That was just, a future project that he wanted to do. But, yeah, another thing I definitely want to mention is Bruce Lee and religion. Now, Bruce Lee was an atheist. There's probably a few things that made him an atheist. One of it had to do with the fact that his mom was very superstitious. So when he was a little kid, his mom actually used to dress him up as a girl because his mom had lost a son when a son was very little, or it might have been in childbirth. So his mom was kind of worried that there were demons out to get her sons. So in order to trick the demons, his mom would dress Bruce up like a girl to, trick the demon that he was a girl and not a boy, because his mom thought that the demon was trying to get her boys. So, Bruce Lee didn't like that, and he didn't like that about religion, so he had become an atheist. In fact, he didn't even believe in Qi. Now, I think had he lived, I do believe he would have expanded upon his philosophy. And I think it's possible he could have become more religious and could have delved down more into things like Qi and all that. But, in his younger years, and, don't forget he was 32 when he died. So, I believe it's something that he would have expanded upon, had he lived longer. But, so, like I said, didn't believe in Qi. However, in Enter the Dragon, you do see him mentioning some things that are very, Taoist. For example, there's, the New Zealand guy on the boat in Enter the Dragon who approaches Bruce Lee and goes, "What's your style?" Yeah, Bruce Lee goes, I believe in the art of fighting without fighting. So that's very Taoist kind of speech, like wisdom in contradiction, like that. I believe in the art of fighting without fighting, or the best style is no style. That's another thing Bruce Lee would say. That's why he wore the tracksuit in the Game of Death, that yellow suit, because that was to symbolize that he wasn't bound by tradition. He wasn't wearing any kind of gi or any kind of clothing associated with a martial art. But, so that's another interesting thing I wanted to add. And a lot of his ideas, too, you have to understand, they really kind of go against, a lot of, Chinese Confucianism in a lot of ways, which is kind of code of morality and order, and, this group of people have to be subservient to this group. And, it's a very, very conservative system designed to sort of bring China back into a golden age that they believed they had gotten away from. Confucianism was the system to bring them back to that golden age. And Bruce Lee didn't really seem to believe in any of that. He was actually quite a bit against that. He was definitely kind of a rebel in a lot of ways. And Bruce Lee, in my opinion, and a lot of people's opinions, is a product of 1960s and 70s counterculture. That's for sure. Right up there with, Jimi Hendrix, Muhammad Ali, John Lennon, Jack Kerouac, Anton LaVey, Allen Ginsberg. I mean, Bruce Lee was a part of that, counterculture. I mean, for sure. And, he did challenge the status quo. And it's kind of interesting. You do look at a lot of the people of that time period. A lot of them did die young, too. Jimi Hendrix, Jim Morrison, Janis Joplin, Malcolm X, even John Lennon, Marilyn Monroe, John F. Kennedy, Robert Kennedy. I mean, the list is pretty long. Martin Luther King. List is pretty long of, people of his era that did kind of die young. So that's kind of strange how that all happened like that. But, definitely, like I said, I think a Bruce Lee documentary comes out usually once every 2 years. A lot of different documentaries. And the more recent ones, like I said earlier, have MMA fighters in them talking about how they believe Bruce Lee is the innovator of mixed martial arts. And another thing I do want to mention is the Bruce Lee worshipers and Bruce Lee haters. I mean, you really have both for this guy. I mean, you have people that practically worship Bruce Lee. They speak of Bruce Lee as if he were like Jesus, pretty much, and in a lot of the same ways. I mean, they do. There are people out there who speak of him in that way and get offended when anybody says anything bad about him. Then, on the other hand, you have these Bruce Lee haters. You could see them on the internet. In fact, goes far enough as to say that there's a whole genre of troll called the Bruce Lee hate troll. I mean, there really is. And I don't really understand why. Would probably assume that a lot of these people are younger. They didn't grow up in the Bruce Lee era. Because there seems to be a difference between how people perceive Bruce Lee. They grew up in the Bruce Lee era versus, say, someone born after Bruce Lee died or a millennial. They seem to perceive Bruce Lee a bit differently. And you definitely see that. I don't understand all the Bruce Lee hate out there. My guess would be, they're younger people who, probably could possibly be MMA fans who feel that, Bruce Lee represents sort of traditional martial arts and that he's very outdated and they're sort of rebelling against the past. And in a lot of ways, Bruce Lee was like that too. That's the weird thing about it. Bruce Lee rebelled against that stuff too. He like I said, he was respected tradition, but he didn't want to be bound by it. He felt it limited. And the younger people, seems to be, like I said, maybe they're, part of the MMA crowd, and they associate Bruce Lee with Kung Fu, and maybe they think Kung Fu is not effective, so they criticize Bruce Lee. I mean, then there's always talk about how would Bruce Lee do in MMA, how would he do? Personally, I'm of the belief that I do believe he would have liked it, but I don't believe he would have done it. Bruce Lee was not a competitor, although he did spar with people, and people who sparred with Bruce Lee often did say that he was untouchable, that he was really good. But, these people don't really say who they are because a lot of times in sparring matches, people kind of don't really mention the outcome of what happened a lot of times in sparring matches. But people have said that he was untouchable. But, I myself believe that he would have liked MMA, but like I said, I don't believe he would have competed in it. Because, he didn't compete in karate tournaments. He did demonstrations, like I said, but he didn't compete in any of the tournaments. So, yeah, that's all I have to say on Bruce Lee. If you watched this video, I do hope you enjoyed it, and I thank you for watching. Have a great day.